Ahoy, you salty sailors. Time to raise anchor and set sail for your best scrawny life. Arr!
So in our last video, we talked about the importance of using saturated color sparingly. You'll recall that we used only a very limited palette, not covering your entire sheet with fully saturated colors right out of the box. But if we're using such dull colors, how are we going to build visual drama? We don't want or in general, we don't want our images to be dull, we want them to be exciting. So how are we going to accomplish that if we're only using saturated color in small amounts? And what about that most important aspect of artistic expression, which is style? Now, I'm guessing that you girls are not quite old enough to be interested in a full dissertation on various movements of art history, such as classicism and mannerism and so forth. So let's consider these things within a much narrower field, that of cartoons and comics, which you might find more interesting. So let's return to the story of a lady who's hunting and camping alone in the mountains of Idaho. Since this is a cartoon, we'll have a line around our subject, and that line will be thinnest and even broken away in the highlight areas and thicker in the shadow areas. And the shading will be either black, fully black in the most dark shadow areas, or it will be some shade of gray. And we'll also use that watercolor technique that gives us that hand-painted look. That will be an element of the style too, but we're not going to discuss that for now. And so we've wound up with something like this. That would be our most basic image. That could perhaps be a frame in an animated film, but it's still not very dramatic. What if we wanted even more drama? Well, the brights are already pretty bright in this image, but we could make the shadows quite a bit darker. And as an aside, let me just say that the media you use often determines what the style is going to be. By media, I mean whether you're using paint, what kind of paper you're using, watercolor paint or oil paint, whether you're using pen and ink. You can't draw this kind of cartoon with oil paint, and you can't create a Rembrandt with pen and ink. So the media you use is often a determining factor in the style. In this case, we're going for that retro cartoon look, and the reason why they used the type of cross-hatching they did is because the newsprint paper it was printed on couldn't hold very fine lines or high line screen halftones very well. So in this case, again, our line will range from thick to thin. Our shading will be black, and we're going to add a lot more black. We're going to darken up the shadows quite a bit. And the shaded areas will be accomplished with lines that range from thick to thin, with cross-hatching lines. This is a binary method of shading. It's either off or on. And the gradations, what would be gradations in gray in a Condone image, will simply be accomplished by making the lines thicker or thinner. The contrast in value with all this black that's going down is what's going to give us visual drama. And a superhero character in a very dramatic story, let's say Batman, is often drawn with a shadow in the middle of his face, and only the sides of his face are lit by street lights or some sort of rim light, which kind of accentuates his strong, heavy jaw, making him look very powerful and dramatic. In this case, we don't need superhero levels of drama. We're working within the genre of adventure comics, so there's a different aesthetic versus the genre of superhero comics. So we're not going to shade in that manner, and that would use a lot less cross hatching and just a lot more sharp shadows. In this case, it's more suitable. We'll have a little more cross hatching. We're going to round those form shadows off towards the light smoothly instead of a more abrupt and rough look. So there we have it, significantly more drama in this image. We're really telling that story now. She's alone and well aware of the danger, but at the same time she's brave and determined and focused on what she wants to accomplish. By the time you girls are entering the workforce, design and art will largely be created with artificial intelligence. You'll only need to know a little bit of the language of style to get the results that you want from a computer. Alright, let's just invent a style of our own. We'll call this the blotchy and scratchy style. Our line is going to be blotchy and broken, and our shading will be blotches of different colors ranging from dark to light. Now I'm using a layer mask, but you could make this same effect by cutting a stencil that would protect the areas you want to remain white, and then taking a sponge or a folded up rag and dipping it in different colors of paint and blotching it around on the areas that are not covered by the stencil. So there we have it. You'll see I'm giving you back a little bit of that saturated color that I took away in the last video, but it looks childish, but childish in a fun way, not in a naive or uninformed way. Of course, this image looks more like the aftermath of a paintball clown party than a hunting expedition in the mountains, so you have to choose a style that's appropriate to the story you're telling. So here is my sketch for a manga-style inspired cartoon with a cat and an otter. Now, cats and otters are relatively dull-colored creatures, so we'll be able to have this bright pinkish orange in the background without it clashing with anything in the foreground. And by clashing is bad. Contrast in color or in value is good. Contrast draws the eye into a focal point. But clashing is where there's just a whole bunch of highly saturated colors that's visually painful to look at. That's what we don't want. So, because we're dealing with relatively dull-colored creatures, we'll be able to have that bright background without anything clashing with it. Our contrast will come from contrast and value, and the color will actually become a harmonizing element. It will just be a more saturated shade of other colors that are found throughout the image. Here is some product packaging where the colors clash. Now the red, white, and green are colors used in the Mexican flag, so those are part of this product's identity. So we don't want to get rid of those colors. Could we get rid of the yellow then, and perhaps make it look a bit more professional? It would be less expensive to print, still going to stand out and get noticed on the shelf. I'm not sure if that's actually an improvement or not. What do you think? This packaging uses the same colors, but the yellow is becoming more of a dominant color, and the complementary colors, the red and the green, don't interact with each other as much. They interact mostly with the yellow. Here we have a similar color scheme, but it looks more professional in my opinion. There's clearly one dominant color, which is the yellow. The blue, which is the complementary color, is darkened up quite a bit, and also it's just used in small amounts. So we're using the same type of color scheme in our image. There's going to be one main dominant color, and even though it's a bright color, it won't clash with the small amounts of darker, less saturated colors elsewhere in the image. Our line in this style will be transparent, and that's why I've added a blue overlay to the sketch layer so I can see what I'm doing in the actual drawing layer. and it will be darker and thicker in areas where there's ambient occlusion. We will also have a thin line between areas of highlight and shadow. And our shading in this style will just be shades of gray. The general shape language tends to be angular rather than rounded, and this is a way of developing more drama in the image. And also extended forms like, say, strands of hair or clumps of hair tend to become very extended. This one I want to look a little more silly than dramatic, so we're not going to go the full angular route. We'll still have some rounded shapes in the faces of the animals and so forth. Now it looks, as I'm coloring this, it appears that I'm coloring with a blue-gray, but if I turn off the background layer, you'll see it's actually a reddish brown. It's actually that orange color of the background added to about a 50% gray, but it looks bluish gray when the background layer is turned on due to color relativity. Once again, the color is only what it is in relationship to what is around it. Now let's consider the role of shape in this composition. In general, shapes that repeat the edge of the container are thought of as stable or stabilizing elements, and shapes that are more organic or that act against the edges of the container are dynamic elements. So in this case, the flat surface of the ocean is a stabilizing element. It repeats the edge of the container. The sun or the moon or the glowing white orb, whatever it is, what do you think about that? Is that stable or dynamic? It does not repeat the edge of the container, but it is placed in the center horizontally, and it's in that golden proportion zone vertically. So we could probably consider the sun a stabilizing element. It creates a rhythm horizontally. There are two equal shapes on either side of it. How about the pilings of the pier or whatever it is that they're standing on with those loose arcs of rope in between them? Now the pilings themselves would repeat the edge of the container, but the rope of course would not, but it creates a rhythm, and rhythms generally would be stabilizing. They're predictable. The figures, of course, are all dynamic. There are broad diagonals, crazy curves and sharp angles and so forth. So just as with color, if every color was fully saturated, you'd wind up with just a mess. So too with shapes. If every shape is dynamic, you just wind up with a jumbled mess. Or if every shape is stable, then your picture would lack drama. So the sense of movement, the life that the characters have, comes from the contrast or the juxtaposition of stable in the background, stable shapes in the background, and dynamic shapes of the characters. Here, only the words oregano and taro, that line is stable. All the other shapes are dynamic. It looks playful but messy. This one takes the opposite approach. All the shapes and lines of text are stable, except the brand name and the logo. Those are the only dynamic ones. It looks a little boring, but established and reliable. So I think in our next video, I'm going to go step by step, slowly through the process of developing a cartoon character in a style that I think you both will be able to do. And then we'll go step by step through the process of creating, let's say, a 3-panel comic strip using our new character. And that will probably be our last art video for a while.